Accidents are awful. Workers can be hurt or killed. Equipment can be damaged and must be fixed or replaced. There are interviews and meetings. Everything is dissected to figure out what went wrong. But there's a better way. Why not figure out what could go wrong before it does? Job safety analysis is a way of planning ahead in the workplace. It's a way to spot problems before they become accidents. It examines the specific steps for a given task, identifies the hazards, and then addresses them before someone gets hurt. A job safety analysis is not like standard operating procedures or job instructions. Instead, it focuses only on those steps that create a hazard to the safety or health of personnel. This program is designed to help you learn to prepare a job safety analysis. It covers preparing for the JSA, identifying job steps, identifying hazards, resolving hazards, and self-inspection. Preparing a JSA is a logical step-by-step activity that can be done by anyone dedicated to safety. You don't need to be an expert, just a good observer who wants to make the workplace safer. Over the last decade or so, you've heard lots of buzzwords applied to accident prevention. The basis for all these safety programs was planning ahead. JSA is also like that, but it lacks the buzzwords and the complicated rules, and instead gets right to the heart of the matter. If you very carefully watch someone perform a task, you can spot all the situations where an injury or accident might occur. If you write down every hazardous component of the task, you can find a way, often a very simple way, to control or remove the hazard. That's JSA in a nutshell. You need two things to do a job safety analysis: a JSA team and a form for recording your observations. First, the form. A basic JSA form uses a standard sheet of paper divided into 3 columns lengthwise. Across the top, describe the job in simple terms and list the location. For example, packing boxes, outgoing mailroom, or moving freight with a forklift, receiving dock. The title on the JSA is a task. It is not a job description for an employee. Thus, a specific employee could have multiple JSAs, one for each task. List the job steps, hazards, and safe work procedures for each task, and post the list in one location. The next step in constructing your JSA form is creating the headings. Over the first column, place the heading Sequence of Basic Job Steps. Over the second column, place the heading Potential Accidents or Hazards. And over the third column, place the heading Recommended Safe Job Procedure. You can add instructions or questions at the top of the first page of the form. With experience, you'll learn the questions that work best for the jobs in your facility. For now, follow the examples laid out in this program. The JSA team should consist of employees who will perform the task and supervisory and safety personnel. Depending on the work situation, one team may conduct job safety analyses for many different jobs. Once team members learn the process, each JSA should take less than 1 hour. But remember, the team must include employees who regularly perform the task in question. That's the only way you can be sure the observers are watching a real work situation. The key to a usable JSA is the sequence of job steps. This breaks the job down into specific steps, describing in sequence what is to be done. The descriptions must be clear, simple, and concise, usually no more than 3 or 4 words for each job step. When listing the job steps, it's important to describe only the actual job steps that contain a hazard, create a hazard, or expose personnel to a hazard or hazardous condition. Don't list environmental or equipment damage, only hazards to people. When you list the job steps, each step should describe what is done, not how it is done. Remember, this is not an operating procedure. For example, if an employee is loading boxes onto a cart in a shipping area, the job steps you write might look like this. Step 1, bend to reach box on floor. Step 2, lift box from floor. Step 3, turn to left. Step 4, place box on cart. The best way to catch all the steps is to ask an experienced employee to perform the task while observers watch. Number each step in sequential order, 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on. This will allow the team to refer to each step by number. It also makes it easier to keep track of the hazard descriptions you'll list in column 2 and the mitigation measures in column 3. Remember, while there might be 50 steps in a given job, only a few of those steps might be hazardous to personnel. Do not place a job step in column 1 unless your observers agree that the step poses a hazard to people. Remember, a JSA is not an operating instruction or job description. It's a list of steps that pose a hazard. That's why the effects of complacency, distractions, and even lack of training can be considered when listing the job steps. The next part of the JSA is to identify the accident that could occur during the job step. Describe the hazard or hazardous condition associated with each step. In many cases, there may be more than one specific hazard associated with a given job step. For example, if job step 2 poses 3 hazards, number them 2A, 2B, and 2C. This makes it obvious that job step 2 contains 3 separate hazards of concern to the employee. If you get to a job step and can't list one or more hazards, then that step should be removed from the list in column 1. When describing hazards, be specific. What is it about the job step that is hazardous? What accidents could happen to people during each step of the job? In answering this about each job step, it may be helpful to focus on the American National Standards Institute, or ANSI, hazard categories. Can the employee be struck by something? Are there vehicles, moving equipment, or flying debris? Can the employee strike against something? Are there sharp edges, fixed equipment, or obstructions? Can the employee fall to the same level? Are there slipping or tripping hazards? Can the employee fall to a different level? Is the employee working at height, or are there edges or openings in the work surface? Can the employee be caught in, on, or between something? Can the employee be pinched or crushed? Can the employee overexert? Are sprains or strains possible? Is lifting involved? Twisting? Carrying? Can the employee come into contact with something hazardous? This is a wide section that includes hazards like electricity, heat, cold, chemicals, dust, fumes, and smoke. Also in this category are noise and vibration, toxic substances, and biohazards like bloodborne pathogens. Can the employee be placed into a hazardous location while performing the job step? Are confined spaces, poorly lit areas, or tight spaces involved? Initially, it may be helpful to keep a list of these hazards in front of you while you watch an employee perform each task. Later on, you'll be able to recognize potential hazards quickly. Remember only to describe the hazard or hazards in column 2. Don't list control measures or add descriptions of job steps. If you need to add job steps, write them in column 1. Then write the corresponding hazards in column 2. By the time you get to this point in your job safety analysis, you have a list of job steps in column 1 and a list of associated hazards in column 2. Now, for each potential accident, ask yourself what exactly should the employee do or not do to avoid the accident. Describe specific precautions and remedies in detail. Give each recommended precaution the same number that you gave to the job step and the hazard to which it applies. In many cases, there will be more than one possible control measure. For example, if a hazard applies to Job Step 2, Hazard 2A, then the recommended safe job procedures will be numbered 2A1, 2A2, and so on. This makes it clear that hazard number 2A for job step number 2 contains 2 separate control measures that could be implemented. When selecting control measures, always prefer controls that eliminate the hazard. Actions that control exposure to the hazard may also work, but are not as fail-safe. Avoid general statements like, "Be careful." These do not protect the employee from the hazard. In many cases, you may find that the number of hazards involved with a task will make you question the entire job method. Is there an entirely different and safer way to do the job? If the job involves repair or maintenance, perhaps there is a way to reduce the hazard by making the repair last longer. A good way to illustrate the JSA process is to go back to that employee who we saw loading boxes onto the cart. Let's look at the steps we listed and see what the hazards are. Step 1. Bend to reach box on floor. Using the ANSI list, what hazards do you see in Step 1? Notice that the employee bends at the waist. This poses a risk of back strain, especially when repeated many times each day. Let's mark this Hazard 1A, repeated bending, possible back strain. Do you see any other hazards? What about that table? What if the employee hit his head on the edge? Let's mark that Hazard 1B, strike head against table. Any other hazards? No? Then let's go on to Step 2. Lift box from floor. This poses the same hazard as Step 1. The employee could strain his back. How heavy is the box? Are all the boxes the same size? How many times a day does he lift a box off the floor? I'd list this as Hazard 2A, repetitive lifting, possible back strain. Let's go on to Step 3. Turn to left. This looks pretty simple, but there's not a lot of room. Let's watch him do it again. See how he twisted his back to turn? Let's call that Hazard 3A, twisting, possible back strain. Now it's time to find safe job procedures, the precautions and remedies that will correct the 10 hazards we found. Again, let's start with Step 1. We found 2 hazards, Hazard 1A, repeated bending, and Hazard 1B, the possibility of striking one's head against the table. What can be done about the bending? The employee can learn to bend at the knees instead of the waist. Let's write that in the third column as Safety Procedure 1A1. Lift with legs, don't bend at waist. But is there a better way? What about using rollers or a conveyor so bending is reduced? Let's call that Safety Procedure 1A2, the second possible solution for Hazard 1A. What about Hazard 1B, the risk of the employee hitting his head on the table when bending? We could take care of that by moving the table and call it Safety Procedure 1B1. Or we could watch that hazard disappear if we put Safety Procedure 1A1 into practice. If we raise the boxes off the floor, bending will be reduced and the employee's head will be safe. Moving on to Job Step 2, lift box from floor. Remember, the hazard here is back strain from repeated lifting. But wait a minute, if the boxes aren't on the floor, then that hazard is reduced. That's the interesting thing about job safety analysis. Often, taking care of one problem takes care of others as well. That brings us to Job Step 3, turn to left. Here, the hazard, Hazard 3A, is twisting. What are some possible solutions? The best one would be to redesign the work area so you minimize the need to twist. Let's write it in and mark it Safety Procedure 3A1. Let's also write in employee training on back safety. You know, when you need to turn, move your feet, not your back. Mark that Safety Procedure 3A2, the second solution to the twisting problem. When your team puts its heads to work, you will find that there are many solutions to every problem. JSA helps prevent costly injuries and can help save lives. As you can see, conducting a JSA is easy. You can come up with solutions quickly, put them into place, and then make the JSA document a must-read for everyone who does that job. But an effective job safety analysis program does not stop there. It takes commitment and constant self-inspection. Complacency can set in, new hazards arise, or a similar hazard can rear up in another operation or unit. That's why JSA is an ongoing process. The more people know about the JSA process, the more safe your workplace will be. Teach employees about JSA and ask them to watch each other work and point out potential hazards. Encourage everyone to be on the lookout for a better way to do every job. That's the only way to maintain safety at your facility. You can list job steps and pinpoint hazards and controls, but your workplace will not be truly safe until everyone works every day to find and fix hazards. That's when you will have true job safety.